Good evening and welcome the Tuesday, January 2nd, 2018 Board of Commissioners meeting is now in session. The Reverend Gallup has been kind enough to brave the cold to come and give us the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. If you could all rise.
I wish everyone a Happy New Year, and I offer this prayer to our county and our commissioners and all of our citizens in our behalf. Let us pray. Our Heavenly Father, we now enter into a new year. Help us to be instruments of peace in a world boiling over frequently with anger and frustration. We're assembled here tonight to conduct our civil business and carry out the responsibilities appointed to us as citizens. We humbly ask your presence to be with us, to possess our minds and our hearts as we carry out our civic duties. When we must act in our deliberations and there is division among us, give us the patience of Job. When we must defend our sacred freedom handed down to us by our grandfathers and grandmothers, give us the wisdom of a Solomon. Guide our business with the virtue of a child. Through our hard work and opportunity, we have a blessed nation. Yet we have unfinished business, equal justice for all, opportunity for those willing to work and share. Our work is never finished. Use our hearts and our minds to continue to work for the dream of a country under God and as a model for all freedom-loving people in the world, setting a positive example for all to see. Bless those who are peacemakers. Our Heavenly Father, we offer this prayer in the name of our Lord, who living and dying taught us that there is hope and there is redemption. Hear our prayer, O Lord, and walk with us as we begin a new year and a new journey. Bless us as we walk hand in hand in our search for wisdom and for understanding. This is our prayer. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. Thank you, Reverend Gallup. First order of business this evening is approval of the agenda. I do have one change under board appointments. I would move to strike board appointments from the agenda as we don't have anyone to nominate this evening.
Mr. Chairman, with that, I'd make a motion for approval.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Moving on to public comment, Ms. Tamron Krugler. Krugler has been kind enough to come up and give us a presentation this evening.
Just a very brief one. I'd like to call your attention to your cupcake that's at your place. This is to commemorate the 350th anniversary of the founding of Currituck County in 1668. So enjoy. It'll be a year full of a lot of wonderful events. Currituck Travel and Tourism plans on having a Pirate Plunder Festival in July. We're busy planning that, and I know other organizations across the county are planning that, their own events. And also, we will have the charter here at the Museum of the Albemarle this year. Stay tuned for dates and when you can see it. It's coming up from Raleigh under armed guard. It will only be here for 24 hours. So make sure you get a chance to see that. It should be really awesome. So anyway, happy birthday, Currituck. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tamron. Thank you for the cupcake as well. Moving on, public hearings. Public hearing in action PB 15-15, Countryside Estates, request for a conditional zoning amendment on property zone C-MXR to remove the farmland buffer, reduce the width of the Type A perimeter buffer, and clarify the pedestrian improvements on 55.66 acres. The property is located in Moyock on the west side of Currituck Highway, 168, south of North Point Boulevard, tax map 9, parcel 79B, Moyoc Township. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ms. LaCicero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The issue before you tonight is an amendment to this CMXR, conditional mixed use. The applicant came before you in November of 2015 and received approval to construct a 62-lot residential subdivision, and it was approved conditional zoning in November with the following conditions. It is 62 minimum of 20,000 square feet that will front on 50-foot public streets, and all lots will be served with public water and sewer. The second condition was the development will be in conformance with the land plan for Countryside Estates. The third condition was the 50-foot vegetated farmland buffer shall be dedicated on the adjacent property to the south, owned by Currituck F&W Land Company, LLC, as an easement. It's a recorded document. And the fourth condition was that in the event that the property to the south remains in active cultivation at the time of the final plat approval, the farmland buffer and easement on the Currituck F and on that neighboring property shall be recorded. This is the property right here south of North Point subdivision by Napolitano Homes. Since this originally was approved, the Moyoc Megasite Master Plan, what we're calling Currituck Station, was adopted by the Board of Commissioners. That happened in June of 2017. So after that adoption, the applicant has come back and requested an amendment to this conditional change. So his request is the removal of the farmland buffer on the neighboring property to reduce the buffer along the northern property, and also he wants to reflect the pedestrian circulation changes that to this plan.
If I could, what are you calling north and what are you calling? I know where it is in my mind, but I want to be sure.
Okay. He's asking to reduce or to specify the buffer along the northern property line here to a type A buffer, and to eliminate the farmland buffer that would be on the adjacent property, this property right here on the southern side, to eliminate that buffer, and also for the circulation patterns to be changed without going into the wetlands. The rear of this property is wetlands, and the original plan showed pedestrian facilities going into the wetlands or around the wetlands, and that would be, let me go back to it. And so those are the three changes he's asking. This is very sensitive. Let me move. Okay. Let me get this mouse. So those are the three changes that that the applicant is asking for.
And he's not asking for changes to the left of the screen there? Where that comes?
On the western side? No, let me get to... So, okay, let me get to this side would be easier. The original plan had a path coming in around the wetlands through here, and to keep from going into the wetlands and to keep having to go into there and filling and doing anything with that, he wants to modify that to the pedestrian facilities to the wetlands, trails and sidewalks. That's not changing. Those wetlands are staying the same. He's asking for a change. This is the farmland buffer that was on the southern property, the property to the south. He's asking, he and the adjacent property owner have agreed to remove that buffer because of the change in the Moyoc Megasite. And on the northern part, he's asking for to specify a type A buffer along that northern property line.
What it has now, what type of change? When I say type A, what?
Well, originally, on the original approval, he suggested a 25-foot buffer. and didn't specify a type A buffer. And now he's coming back and asking for, and in type A you have two options. You have a 25-foot buffer with a certain number of trees, or you can have a 10-foot buffer. Option number 2 is a 10-foot buffer with more plantings. In his original plan, he specified a 25-foot buffer, and now he's asking for that to change to a type A buffer, so that he would have the option for either a 25-foot buffer with less plantings or a 10-foot buffer and more plantings. That's the big issue for the northern property line.
Okay, Ms. Cicero, you said these were changes based on with the mega site that came in. So how does the mega site affect the northern side of that then?
Okay, it doesn't affect the northern side of
Okay.
it, but it does impact.
Right, but earlier you said these changes were brought up because of when the mega site came into place.
For the southern.
Southern part,
For the
not for all of it. So he just wants to make a change to the northern piece of it.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. When he was coming in to ask for that change, he decided to do that because in the original plan it specified a 25-foot buffer and didn't specify just a type A. It got into the specificity of which buffer, and like I said, and he would like to have it a type A buffer without the specificity of which one, the option to choose.
I have a couple questions, if I
Okay.
can. The farmland buffer is self-explanatory. It's one landowner, correct?
Correct.
Individual lot owners that abut that north stretch
With a ditch in between.
with the ditch. There's a ditch in between, but they're individual property owners.
Yes, to
that
the
abut that.
north it would be North Point, so it would be individual property owners.
And what's the reason for wanting to go from a 25-foot to a 10-foot buffer?
Probably, I mean, that's a question that you would ask the applicant,
Okay.
but I would assume to create just more
Okay.
space in the lot.
Okay, then on the west side, the original approval, it was wetlands. Was the intent to just clear it and have a walking trail, or was the intent to have wooden walking trails? How was that originally?
To have like a walking trail around the wetlands. It is on this one. It's not very clear, but there is a small walking trail around the wetlands. But due to disturbing the wetlands, coming in and filling in different areas, the applicant has requested to change that.
Now, do we know if any of these lots have been pre-sold or are under construction, and someone may have bought thinking they were going to have a net walking trail through the woods, and now they're not? Do we know that?
I am assuming that we haven't. I mean, that we know that they haven't.
There's a model home going in there.
But that would
Okay.
be another question for the applicant if he's
Okay.
pre-sold.
Because I think,
I'm sorry, Mike, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, because I think when I was sitting on here when this came up, and Commissioner Beaumont may as well, I thought there was some concerns with, some of the concerns I think we heard was to make sure there was like walking areas around there, and they were sure to be like some kind of a walking activity for them, and that's one of the reasons why we approved it as is as well. And you're saying that they want to do away with that now? Is what I'm
With
hearing?
that one around the wetlands, but they do have, every lot will still, I think they're going to get walking trails to the wetlands, and every lot will still have sidewalk, access to a sidewalk, a 5-foot sidewalk, or an 8-foot trail. There'll still be trails through, like the rear of the property into the open space. There's still going to be
Not
trails
around
there.
the whole side like originally was proposed, though.
Not around the entire wetlands at the western end of the property.
Sorry to take up the space, but the northern property, have those individual homeowners agreed to this change, or have they been made aware of this change?
They have been made aware of it. A community meeting was held. Now this,
I read there were some concerns at the community meeting.
correct, and most of the concern was over drainage, and not necessarily the buffer. And the applicant can speak more to that. But the staff that went to that meeting said that there was a lot more concern over drainage than necessarily the buffer.
Was there any opposition to the buffer?
The change in the buffer.
Any opposition been voiced to changing the buffer? What I have a concern with is that this has come before us before, and we've done a really good job of not setting the precedent of when someone comes with something, not changing it.
Correct.
I guess I would ask the applicant, but what's the purpose? What's the intended purpose for reducing from 25 to 15? Obviously, it fit there before and was working to some point before. And I have a concern about, if you bring something forward and you say, this is what you're going to get, but then you back up and say, well, I don't really feel like, I don't mean that in a bad way. I don't really feel like building this walkway for no other reason than it cost prohibitive or whatever it is.
Correct, and he does have an approval on record, so he does have an approval,
Right.
to move ahead with this project.
Okay.
So, and I think the reason that this came up was the change in the farmland buffer, because that area to the south is designated on the Currituck Station Millioc Mega Site Master Plan as a higher density.
I don't see any issue with that.
I have a question about
Well,
that.
I don't.
I just have a
that's-
couple questions.
Yeah.
And I guess did you want to go first?
But go ahead. You can.
Okay.
Well, look at everyone starting out the new year being so nice. Isn't that sweet?
Somebody get a picture of this. Okay. So my first question is, going back to the mega site, mega plan, and I certainly don't remember, what was going to be, or what have we earmarked for that area on the mega site?
Okay.
Great minds think alike.
This right here is Countryside Estates. So below it is going to be a medium density residential and higher density back here. Up here would be medium density and some office along the front, and office, and I
But
think
it is
medium
housing.
density. But it is housing. It is residential.
Yeah.
So
Potential housing. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And
it would be a little bit higher density than what's on the project property.
okay, and then I'm going to claim ignorance. Why do we have farmland buffer?
It was to protect the farmer and a residential subdivision so that they don't, when a new residential subdivision comes in, we have a farmland buffer to, protect the homeowners, the new homeowners from the dust and all the things that come along with farming, but it would also protect the farmer that he would not be creating a nuisance to this new, all these new single-family homes that are coming in.
So the next question would be, what is more disruptive, basically planting season once a year, or months and months of daily excavation, grading,
That's where I was going.
and so, and it's going to be farmland until that begins, which is probably going to be, well, I mean, we don't know. And so, okay.
So currently we it seems to me that you pretty much hit the nail on the head, that there needs to be some type of buffer on the southern boundary line. Looking at them, if
We
that
got a type
developed the
A, we
same
got a
way-
type A on the north.
Right, and right for a neighborhood. So if you're going to have another neighborhood behind it, it should be equal on both sides. And at the very least, if this map, if it develops how it's laid out, we're going to have a lot of traffic coming in and out of that road. Potentially, if the road ends up there, it just seems to me that a buffer would make good sense on the southern side of this. Maybe not 50 feet.
But I guess the applicant's going to come up and.
Right.
Yeah, I
Tell us
have
why.
one more question for Ms. LaCicero, if I may. What's the difference in density between a 25-foot and a 10-foot type A?
Okay. The 25-foot, you'd have 6 aggregate caliper inches of canopy trees. So you'd have 6 canopy trees, 6 bigger canopy trees, and then 6 understory trees per linear foot. If you go with the 10-foot width, you'd have 2 canopy trees, 10 understory trees, and then you'd have 15 shrubs per 100 linear feet. It would be all done in that 10-foot space. You'd have significantly more plantings with a smaller
Caliper.
And they would be lower to the ground.
Yeah, you'd have the shrubs, you'd have the understories, and then you'd have canopies.
Gotcha. Okay.
But a lot more, you don't have the shrubs in the 25-foot.
Correct.
Just mid-story and larger caliper.
Correct.
Okay.
And you'd have 10 more of the understory trees in the, less canopy, but more of the understory trees in the 10-foot buffer.
Okay.
Plus whatever else grows in there.
Exactly.
As long as
And
it's
what-
untouched.
As long as it's undisturbed.
So,
What's the difference in the size of the properties in North Point and Countryside?
Countryside is a little bit smaller. I think North Point is about a little over an acre and a half, I think, and Countryside is at 40,000 square feet.
Okay, because part of us having this discussion was during the time that we were doing the transitional from one development to another, so that there was some variance between them, which is why the larger buffers, in my opinion, is how we made some of our decisions. And the same with the transition from Countryside to the higher density proposed housing that's supposed to be going in the mega site. So I'm kind of leaning towards keeping those buffers because of that reason, as we talked about transitional.
And let me specify again that the southern buffer is actually not on Napolitano's property. It's on the property to the south. So that was an agreement between the property owner to the south and this developer on that. So that's, which is very unique, which we don't do this typically. But there was a condition that was approved.
That was part of our conditions.
That was part of your conditions for approval, correct.
Any further questions for Ms. LaCicero? If we could have the applicant come forward. If you would please state your name for the record.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Board of Commissioners. My name is John Napolitano. My address is 1492 South Independence Boulevard. Hopefully I can clear up some of the questions that I've hearing tonight. First of all, let's start with the walking trails. The walking trails around the wetlands, quite honestly, was a surprise to me that they was still there. I thought that was eliminated prior to our approval. This was kind of a cleanup. I agreed to pay, and I don't have the exact, I think it's around $45,000 into a park system so that we didn't have those trails, because in order to install them, we would have to disturb the wetlands, and found out we really can't do that. So what we did do was add sidewalks within the community throughout, so that people do have the ability to walk throughout the entire community back to the wetlands area, but there's really no need to go into the wetlands because it truly is wetlands. There's nothing to go walking back there to see. I thought that was eliminated prior to our original thing, and so I think this was sort of like a cleanup measure as we were doing these buffers. The reason for the buffers, first of all, on the southern side, at the time when we agreed to it, the mega site was not something that was even really being discussed at that point. Once it came into being, that property on the south side is becoming much more valuable to the property owners. And to install a 50-foot buffer of vegetation that by the time it starts to mature is probably going to get torn out, because somebody's going to want to build offices to the front part of the property and higher residential to the back part. I came in to see, is that something that the staff would entertain doing away with? They agreed, and in fact, staff has approved all of my requests. So that was the reason for that. The North Point buffer, and I think a picture is worth 1,000 words, that's what is currently there right now, and that's going to stay there. When we originally started this community, we thought that all of those trees were going to be coming down as part of our development. And once we got in there and we got the major part of the site cleared where we could really stake it out to the property line, put up our silt fence and things, we realized none of those trees were coming down at all. So the buffer, there's still a great buffer there. And actually, when I went in and I talked with Donna about doing away with the southern buffer, I really wanted to try and do away with the northern buffer. She said, no, I can't do that. What I'm proposing to do, in my opinion, and I hope you all agree with me, is a win-win for everybody. Those trees stayed, so there is a natural buffer there. I had agreed to and again, I thought it was a 20-foot buffer, not 25, but I agreed to a 25-foot buffer because I thought that those trees were all coming down, and this way we would plant something along there that eventually would grow in thick and become a buffer sort of like this again. Being that that's already there and we have a natural buffer, I'm willing to go in and do a type A buffer, which is 10 foot instead of 25. Now, it's going to cost me more money at the end of the day because I have to put more plantings in there. But, in my opinion, it gives us a thicker buffer, a denser buffer between us and North Point. So that creates a better situation for the North Point neighbors and my neighbors. And yes, it does pick up 15 foot in the backyards of my customers. But again, it's a win-win all the way around because we're going to create a better buffer at the end of the day than we would if we had just put in the 25-foot buffer. And the 25-foot buffer, remember, is less dense and has less plantings in it. But I'm willing to do that because, again, at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a better situation for everybody all around. As far as the lot sizes, North Point is 3-acre lots. They're not acre and a half. They're 3/4 of an acre, and mine are half acres. So when we did this job originally, you may remember, we did 20,000 square foot lots purposely so that the difference between North Point and our property was not that dramatic of a difference. We just went down 1/4 of an acre. So instead of them having in their backyard 3 houses behind them possibly, they're going to have a property line here or there, but basically looking at, well, they're not going to see anything with those trees there. So we had only dropped down to 20,000 instead of the 15,000, which we could have done in that, because we just felt that was a better fit for the community at that point. So those are the 3 things that we were asking for. And again, the reason we came back to even start was because of the mega site being approved at that point. That changed the whole dynamics out there. And as we looked at it, we looked at the North Point border and then the walking trail. As I said, I thought that was eliminated originally because I agreed to pay into something else so we could eliminate that, and we added sidewalk into the community. And there is another picture that shows the sidewalk I had turned in with my original packet because they wanted to see the sidewalk, and there should be another layout, but it shows the sidewalk much more clear. That shows it throughout the entire community. So that's...
If I could ask...
Yes, sir.
And it's kind of a mutual question. You know, the purpose of a landscape buffer is to provide visual opacity, right, between. And, you know, going back to those pictures, I don't know what you're going to gain. So this is kind of, I hear your point. I mean, your opacity is far greater with what's here and existing. Is he required to plant even though plantings are not necessary? How about that as a question? In other words, if you have 100% opacity, planting a couple of crepe myrtles in front of that is not going to do anything to help increase 100%.
He would be, some plantings would be required. We can do existing, he may be
Credit
be
for
able to get credit
existing.
for existing.
So,
Some
because my
plantings
thought would
required.
be, at the end of the day, it should not be more expensive.
But I remember when this was that came up the first time, the discussion of the trees came up, and it was discussed at that time that they were not going to be touched anyways. That's what I remembered. Some of the discussions the discussion was about, and it was said, well, there's already a buffer there anyways, so this is going to make it even more. We'll keep the sites away, and that's what some of the concerns that the citizens had. And we talked about the ditches, and we said there was only a tree line there and a buffer there already. And so when you say we're going to leave the trees there, but that I recall that the trees being discussed in the first go around.
I don't remember that. In fact, when we went through this
They've been there.
Oh, they've been there, but when we went through the rezoning, nobody showed up in opposition to it at either Planning Commission or at y'all's meeting. I was always under the impression until we got in there that those trees were coming down because I thought that ditch was halfway on my property. It wasn't until we could really get in there and stake it out clearly that we realized that they were not, and we left them in place.
So where are those trees?
They're
Are they
actually, some of them are on my property, but barely. They didn't have to get touched. Most of them are really on North Point's property. North Point actually owns that entire ditch.
Got it.
And I recall somewhat similar to Commissioner Payment, that the trees were staying, and we commended you for that, and for the fact that you made the lots larger, so somebody wouldn't have to look out at 3 pieces of property. It might be 1 or 1.5.
Right.
So, I mean, those are, I remember somewhat Commissioner Payment, that the trees were staying.
We'd have to go back and look at the minutes because, as I said, I do not recall any discussion on these particular trees because I was always under the impression that they were coming down. I could be mistaken, and what we are doing, and let me just add this in, you all know that I have tried very hard to be a good neighbor and do things the right way. In this tree line, we have 3 places where the neighbors of North Point took their trees down, and it's bare, and I think you can see it in one of the pictures there. My landscaper, in his landscape plan for the buffer on those 3 areas, we're going to add more landscaping just to try and fill in that where the homeowners took down trees. So, again, I'm trying to just create the best situation for both sides of the property line.
Okay, and then back to the walking trails.
Yes.
He's paying $45,000 into a fund?
Yes, the fee in lieu for the recreation facilities.
So,
Okay.
so was that an error that it didn't get removed by the county staff, or was that, how did it get left on there if Mr. Napolitano wasn't aware it was on there and it got approved in that fashion?
I'm not sure. I'd have to investigate that.
But everybody signed off on it.
But everybody, it was evidently what was approved, it said approved in accordance with the plan, and the plan still showed the trail in the wetlands, so.
And if I can, I'm not trying to beat the horse, but during the initial approval, the citizens on the north side of that property, were they concerned about the buffering?
I'm
Yes.
not-
They were.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I would have been too if I lived there to know whether or not those trees were going to come down or not.
All right. Okay.
If we were to take
But-
the walking trail out,
Mm-hmm.
does the top road where the court is and the south road, would they be connected where if I'm doing a walk, I'm doing my power walk, I'm out there doing it, and I don't want to walk up and down the same street, I can walk around there, but would they be connected?
There is a trail that wraps around, I don't have the pointer,
Right.
the one that connects the 2 cul-de-sacs.
Okay,
Yeah.
so they do
But
connect.
again, I agreed to pay into the fund because I was under the impression, and they're not on my construction plans. That trail is not on there because we were all under the impression, including my engineer, that was eliminated because of the fact that I can't go in and touch those wetlands without permits and things and what have you. And we didn't realize the extent. That property was so overgrown when we first took it. It was hard to realize the extent of what we were really dealing with.
Is that documented somewhere, that you had agreed to pay?
Oh, yes, it's in the conditions. Yes, sir.
That you agreed to pay the $45,000 in lieu of the walking trails? Is that written down somewhere?
I think that's what I want to see too. If that was-
I don't know how it was worded. I didn't realize that was a big issue this evening because, again, to me, that was a clarity point.
That's typical when there is a Greenland area that they pay into
I don't have an issue with that, but
Right.
Mr. Napolitano is saying that he wasn't aware that it was still on there because he had agreed to pay
Right.
$45,000.
But originally he was going to do it, I think.
That's,
Yeah. And in answer to your question, there are no sales out there, so nobody has been sold a home thinking that X, Y, and Z is going in, and it's not. I don't play that game. Once we
Right, I
start
understand.
sales, what's on there goes
Right.
in.
And if I could, okay, so the farmland buffer that is in existence today is not on your property.
No, sir.
It's on the southern property.
Yes.
But a condition of the approval of your property reflected he had to leave his in place.
The condition is that if at the time that we got to recording that plat, which that back half of the property where the front half is where offices would go, but by the back part where there's residential, we're probably about a year or two away from that. The other reason, and so again, it was going on his property, but now that the conditions of that property have changed, that's changed the values in it. And I know some of the commercial guys who are looking at that property right now, and that's what prompted me to come back and say, hey, wait a minute, way back we didn't think anything would get built here for many years to come. Now all of a sudden we have this new plan in sight. There's commercial guys down here who are really looking at this.
So if the farmland buffer remains, you're not impacted at all.
No.
So future requests for what goes on with the agricultural property today could request the change of that farmland buffer to something else, which this board could then consider for action at that time. So our ruling on that is not necessary for you to get a CO or to continue the process relative to the farmland buffer.
Okay.
No, I'm asking.
Rephrase the question.
All right, so you're going to keep building out the way it sits, whether the farmland is approved or not, the farmland buffer. Is he requiring you to take the farmland buffer down?
We have talked about it. I mean, originally I was installing the farmland buffer on his property.
There is no buffer.
Oh, there is no buffer
there now at all.
Then why he doesn't want to build it to have it taken out.
Right.
$100,000 or whatever to build it. Right. Right.
Okay.
Well, that's why I was questioning if there could be a buffer on Mr. Napolitano's project.
What is
going on the north side?
What is a farmland buffer? I mean, relative to a type A.
It's a little bit more intense. It's a little bit bigger. Let me get up the.
Otherwise, nothing. It can be right up to the ditch. Clear cut to the ditch.
Something's got to get the Roundup. So you put in the farmland buffer.
Got to get the what up?
Roundup. Agricultural humor.
Wow.
I don't know why the tree died. Right?
So we, at this point, we don't know.
Ow.
We don't know about the walking trail situation. Is that correct? We don't know if that fee had agreed to been paid for, or to his understanding it was, but it got approved with the walking trails on there.
It did get approved with the walking trails on it. The original conditions, I'm looking at the original staff report for the 2015.
Does it mention anything about the 45,000?
It does not mention anything about the 45,000. It does mention about the trail system.
That would be in place part of the approval.
Did he offer any other amenities such as a clubhouse or anything?
No.
No, but I did add sidewalks in because, again, in my mind, we had already agreed that those had to come out because I can't go into the wetlands, so we added sidewalks in more areas of the property that were not on the original. If you look at this, there's areas that are missing that now have. That's why I wish we had that other plat here. So no, that's a whole nother job. I recycle. But no,
Delineated
that's
wetlands. He can't go in
Yeah,
there.
right. And
I mean, depending on.
I would have a question before we go any further, probably for Mr. McCree, or for Ms. LaCicero. Can we approve or disapprove portions of this request, or does it all have to be approved or disapproved?
I think you have the authority to approve or disapprove, approve a portion of the request, but understand that this is a conditional amendment to a conditional rezoning. So both parties have to agree to whatever conditions
Understood.
are modified. Otherwise, it will not be deemed approved.
And to see
Right.
if the application accepts it.
Yes.
Okay.
now I will tell you. I don't know if all of you read the minutes from the Planning Commission meeting or not. Originally, on the North Point side, we were reducing it from 25 to 20. one of the commissioners sat here and he asked a question. He said, I don't understand. If you're reducing it from 25 to 20 and you got to put in a Class A buffer with all the trees, why wouldn't we just put it at the 10-foot, which is a type A buffer? And at the end of the night, that's what they all voted for, was to do that and just reduce it down to the 10-foot buffer. And one of the commissioners also said he went out and spoke with all the folks who were at the meeting, and nobody had an objection to that. The few that voiced a concern didn't care one way or the other. The rest did not care because of all the trees that are still there. They're not even going to get the benefit of that buffer because it's going to be on my side, my side of all these trees. They're not even going to see it.
Will they get the benefit of not seeing the houses?
Well, they're not seeing them now because of these trees.
Right. Well, that's the point. That's why the
Right.
trees stay.
Right, that's what I say, with the trees there, so with whatever buffer I put in on that side, North Point is not going to get any benefit from that buffer at all. What I'm thinking is by going to the 10-foot buffer and making it more dense, it'll be a better sound barrier.
What else? The other thing it would do is if in the event somebody gets a major logging, idea and starts cutting down all the trees in their backyard, at least the residents that with a type A in place, the people that move into this neighborhood still will have a buffer between the house. They can't control what goes on
Right.
on property that's not theirs, so the
Right.
buffer would then provide some degree.
So what has
Well,
changed? Why do you
it-
need
it-
the
it-
extra 15 feet?
If I can, before we get off of that, if I
Okay.
can, I have a question for the arborist. If someone farms trees, if you're cutting down trees to farm and to log them, under agricultural with trees, there is no buffer. You can go all the way up to the property line,
That's correct.
so the buffer wouldn't matter.
Correct.
I don't,
That's a true
No,
statement.
that's true.
up to the property line?
Property line.
I thought you
If
had
it's-
little easements that you had to,
No.
like a drainage ditch in there, I think you got.
If the tree is on the property line, you can't cut it down. But if it is on your property, you can go to the property line. as long as
So
the tree's
allowing
still
that
in.
10-foot buffer wouldn't
Correct.
make a difference to a property owner, because if he wants to cut his trees down, he can go cut his trees down.
But the point being, a type A buffer that is inside that tree line, they can cut to the tree line, to the property line.
Right.
You
Right.
still have the
Keeps the
type A in
buffer on-
place.
on-
So that would make sense in that
Okay,
case.
okay. Thank you. Any further questions for Mr. Napolitano?
Well, I guess the question I was asking before is, why now do you need the more 15 extra feet now? What has changed, or what was the reason for adding it?
The change was simply that we found a better solution that was a win-win for both communities. As I said, originally, our plans had shown those trees were coming down, or some of them, maybe not all of them, but quite a few of them, because we thought they were on our side and we were going to need to for grading purposes. When we realized that they were not coming down, to me, again, I'm going to spend more money doing a 10-foot buffer than a 25-foot buffer, but it's going to create a better situation for both communities. Yes, it gives my customers that are along that side, but I got plenty of other lots in there, but the people along there will pick up 15 extra feet of yard, but it'll create a denser buffer that will prevent sound. And again, just being a denser buffer, we're going to fill in any of the holes and things that may be in those trees. So it wasn't something that, we're looking to come back and, let's change this. It was something that when we looked at it said, this is a better situation for everybody. Let's request a change while we were coming in talking about the farm buffer on the other side. So it was just a way to improve sometimes when you do these communities, you can't see everything up front. I mean, it's impossible. You're looking at it on paper. When you get out there and really see it, that's when you can really see some things. This was, to me, a great opportunity to make a better situation out there for both communities.
Would you be open to, instead of the farmland buffer, to be converted to a type A buffer on the south boundary as
By
well?
putting it on my property, yes,
Okay.
I'd do that. That way then we know it's in place. Sure.
Okay. Okay. Any further questions for Mr. Napolitano? Any questions for Ms. LaCicero? Thank you, Mr. Napolitano.
Don't need pictures anymore, or should I take those back?
No, sir.
Please recycle those.
Thank you.
Please recycle that.
I'll take them all from mail.
Excellent.
One last question.
Bobby
I have,
Hanig.
since
Yes, sir.
I'm the first speaker, do I get the cupcake?
Fine with me.
First, first one that
I
grabs
saw,
wins.
I saw you lick it, so.
And with that, I'll open the floor for a motion. I'm sorry, I apologize. With that, I'll open the public hearing for Countryside Estates. Would anyone like to speak to the public hearing for Countryside Estates? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing. I'm sorry, sir. Yes, sir, if you would please come up and state your name and address for the record. Thank you, sir.
Howdy, all. I'm Aaron Freeman, 101 South Street of North Point. I just want to say you guys are doing a great job asking questions. And I would just like to say about those pictures, though, they seem to be at an angle because when I walk the streets and you see those trees that are still there, it's almost like prison bars. You can see right through them. And I don't know if that's any valuable input, but that's something that we notice on our side. But that's all I wanted to say.
So what I'm hearing from you is you like the original concept with the way it was originally approved.
I believe so.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak? With that, I'll close the public hearing and open the floor for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve PB 1515 Amendment 1 because it is consistent with the land use plan, because it is at a density appropriate for the location, policy HN 1, with adequate public facilities available, policy PP 2, and is located in the fastest growing area of the county that continues to evolve as a full service community, Moyoc area policy emphasis. The request is reasonable and in the public interest because it provides a perimeter buffer between the existing development North Point and the proposed development with the following stipulations. So clarifying on the three issues. Number one, the paths to be revised to reflect the current or the requested change, deletion of the paths through the wetlands. Number two, that the northern boundary be changed to reflect a type A buffer. And the reason for that is the 25-foot is actually one aspect of the two options under a type A buffer. Hence, the concept was there. This is just providing a little extra flexibility. And then finally, that the farmland buffer the requirement for farmland buffer to be removed, however, a type A buffer to be installed on the Countryside Estates property line in lieu of that farmland buffer.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No.
I have 3 ayes and, I'm sorry, I have 4 ayes and 3 noes. Is that correct?
Correct.
Motion passes. Moving on, public hearing and action, PB 17-09, Mainstay Construction Incorporated, request for conditional rezoning of 20.01 acres from agricultural to conditional single-family residential mainland for properties located at Tulse Creek Road, tax map 14, parcel 18D, and parcel 18E, Moyoc Township. With that, I'll hand it over to Ms. LaCicero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a request for a 13-lot residential subdivision in the Moyoc Township along Tulse Creek Road. It is adjacent to Dustin Lane subdivision. The land use classification is rural for this area. This is the land use classification. And then it is currently zoned ag. And the total acreage is 20 acres, and they are asking for 13 lots. A community meeting was held in October at the Moyoc Public Library, and questions were raised about the wooded portion of this lot. Let me get to this. They are proposing 13 lots, and they do have essentially a 2-acre stormwater pond here. This is pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. This is the rezoning for this subdivision. It will come back to you probably in February as a use permit because any subdivision, any major subdivision at this point requires a use permit. And that is because we are, for our adequate facilities ordinance, adequate public facilities, we are at 85% capacity of our high school. So if any of our schools are at 85% or greater, subdivisions will have to come back to you for a use permit. This is the rezoning, conditional rezoning, so that they can get that in place so that that can come back to you. The Technical Review Committee did review this and added some let's see, I'm sorry. That's not right. So let me go back. It's the area. This is rural in the land use plan and in the small area plan. It is limited service in that area. And limited service in the Moyock Small Area Plan means low to moderate residential units, densities that range between 1 and 1.5 acres. And this is for areas that are less intensely developed than full service areas. So,
Mrs. Cicero?
Yes.
Can I call a recess? I want to call a recess if I could.
Yes.
I need to be excused for a minute.
Okay.
5 minutes? Thank you. If I could call us back into session, and if you would, Mrs. Cicero, continue. Thank you.
Thank you. The areas around it, the area, there's some single-family mainland around it to the south, and to the north there's conditional single-family already in place with the Dunstan Lane. And this did receive approval by the Technical Review Committee and the Planning Board. And you can see in the staff report, there are the agreed-upon conditions of approval are that the minimum building site will be 1,800 square feet, wood frame construction only, farm animals will be prohibited, and individual mailboxes and individual roll-out trash cans. And like I said, the Planning Board did approve this, and you will see this again as a use permit.
Ms. LaSister, did the post office thing get figured out whether or not they have to have?
They've submitted a request for it to have individual mailboxes, but at the time of Planning Board, they had not heard back from the postmaster. I know that came out a few years ago that they're no longer wanting individual mailboxes.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
You jump.
To the south, in the information that we've got, there's a proposed subdivision. I'm looking on page 28. Says it's undeveloped farmland, but there's a proposed subdivision.
To the south, this, I think this is some of the area that is going to be, that was part of Currituck Reserve along Tolles Creek around this area, and they are in the process of refining their plans for that.
Ms. LaCicero, regarding the land there, is that, I know there's lowlands and the soil is pretty wet, and is that going to create any type of flooding issues, or is the land, I mean, is that what kind of flood zone is that in right now?
I'm not sure, but they would have to go in and delineate wetlands, and they would have to meet our stormwater requirements, and if they are in a flood zone, they would have to build accordingly.
A lot of that area around there, I mean, it is pretty low, and soil's kind of, okay, I mean, that's just a concern.
Would they have to satisfy wetland issues or low-lying areas prior to our final plat approval?
They should go in and at least delineate the wetlands before the final
And establish
approval.
draining before we would approve a subdivision? Okay.
And what buffers you say are there at all on the outside of their property that goes around it?
At this point, they would have to, they are not proposing any buffers at this point because it's single family to the north of them and single family already zoned around that, and because we wouldn't require a buffer between similarly zoned properties.
Okay. And is that including to the backside, I guess, I know, like you said, north and south, but what about to the backside? Is that also single family already?
Yes, all around it would be single family, except to the north is conditional single family.
Okay. I know the two corners that are up there to the left of Dunstan Lane and to the right of this property, on the road, in heavy rain, it floods, and at least twice a year, there's at least 3 foot of water on the road. On Tulls Creek, on those two corners. We've
Yeah.
had it where it's almost as bad as going through some of the other areas.
Is that where the pond
That's
location
going to be,
is?
that's where the pond's going to be located, correct.
It's a little bit of a bank right there, and it just floods real bad, at least twice a year.
Right, well, now, with that said, with the pond being there, will all of that now drain to the pond instead of being stuck out on the road? Or
The property would have
Are we
to-
getting ahead of ourselves?
The property would drain to that pond. That would be the intent of the stormwater pond, to hold their required amount of rainfall.
When they call it a pond, is there a certain depth, if we're using that word, I mean, versus a swale versus a ditch? Is there any depth to this pond that they're asking for, or that is associated with the word pond?
I'm not sure how deep that this is going to be, but it would be, deeper than just a swell. This would have to hold their required amount of stormwater, which would probably be significant over this 20 acres.
Right. I'm just thinking,
And is there any other open space in this development other than the pond? And is
No,
there not any required?
due to the small number of, it's only 19 lots. Let me make sure that. So they're not required to have any open space.
Okay.
13 lots. Sorry, 13 lots are not required to have any.
Okay. Any further questions for Ms. LaCicero at this point? If I could have the applicant come forward. Please state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Dylan Tillett. I'm an engineer with Quibel & Associates. And myself and the applicant are here tonight to answer any questions you all have. First one is about the, well, do you want, which answer do you, which
Start
question?
wherever you want, man.
Okay. I heard the woods, there was question on wetlands in the woods. We have gotten the United States Army Corps of Engineers out there, and we have a signed plat of no wetlands on this property. The elevation actually climbs a little bit to the mature woods in the rear of the property, so it does not go down there. It actually climbs just slightly. The pond depth will be in accordance with the state's requirements. I think minimum is 3 feet below normal water level, but will probably be deeper than that to follow any kind of requirements that they have. The open space, there is extra open space in the rear of the property, along with the open space up by the front with the pond. And it is a 13-lot subdivision. Did I hit all of them?
how wide is, I mean, I guess I'm trying to think. No ditches in the front of the property. They're all going to be on the backside.
There'll probably be roadside swales in the middle of the property along the road that will deliver stormwater runoff to this pond.
Okay.
And the pond current, or the way the rainfall falls right now is currently delivering water to that drainage ditch. And you mentioned it's ponding up right there. Well, now, as mentioned, the entire subdivision will drain to our pond, and with Currituck County's stormwater management manual, is no longer going to that ditch. We're going to retain it in our pond and discharge the 2-year pre-development storm. So, if anything, it should be reducing the amount of stormwater exiting our property.
Okay. Any further questions for Mr. Tillett? Thank you, Mr. Tillett.
Thank you.
With that, I will open the public hearing for Mainstay Construction conditional rezoning. I currently don't have anyone signed up. With that, I will close the public hearing, and I will open the floor for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that approve PB 1709 Mainstay Construction for the request for conditioning the rezoning of the 20 acres from agriculture to conditional single family for the properties located on Tulse Creek Road.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Moving on, public hearing and action, PB 17-15, Currituck County. Currituck County requests to amend the Unified Development Ordinance to update Chapter 10 definitions and measurement, subsection 10.3.6, height to clarify the size and placement of appurtenances, yes, including church spires, belfries, cupolas, and domes. And with that, I will hand it over to Ms. LaCicero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over the past few years, Currituck County has seen our houses get more, making the maximum use of our Unified Development Ordinance. And we're starting to get very odd or different looking appurtenances on our homes. This is in Corolla. We received a plan here, and if you can see what's kind of highlighted in this little cloud that says A, we got these plans, and the architect was calling this a cupola.
Wow.
And essentially this large extension to the roof, because we don't have a cupola defined, we don't have any standards on this definition, we're very limited in whether this is a cupola or if it's not, and we're also required, if an architect or an engineer tells us that's a cupola and we don't have another definition, we have to accept it. So this is, you see that's a cupola, and then it's the same version, or the same cupola, but it's on the front. It's adjacent to the front wall of the house, and then you have like 3 different cupolas, and so it's kind of a way to maximize our building height of mean roof height of 35 feet from grade. So as staff, we thought that this was getting a little bit hard to kind of regulate. Like what point does it stop being a cupola and become the roof? So we put together some regulations. Let me get one last here, and you see that this is a cupola, this is a cupola, and this is a cupola, but it's taken up, I'd say at least 45% of the roof line. So we put together some language to kind of at least give us some standards to define a cupola, and that's what's before you tonight. Essentially, we're asking for cupolas the area of a cupola to cannot exceed 10% of the footprint of the structure of the roof. So essentially, the footprint of the building, and the cupola could not exceed 10% or 200 square feet. So we're put the maximum cap on it at 200 square feet. And it has to be situated on top of the roof, and it can't do like this one did, where it shared the front wall of the house. And then we also, that's one, and it shouldn't be like an extension. It should be a cupola, should be an architectural feature that sits on the house and is not structurally, would not structurally put the house in any kind of structural harm if it's not designed exactly the way it should be. So that's what's before you tonight. With these three, I guess, standardize a cupola. The planning board did hear this. They actually gave us direction. We had a work session, not a work session. We spoke about it, and we got really good input from them about the size of a cupola. They did put a height limitation on a cupola of 75 feet, that it could not be any greater than 75 feet from finished grade. So that would be the other requirement that we would put into this at the board's direction. Any questions for me on cupolas?
Do that for me one more time.
The planning board would like to see a 75-foot maximum height from finished grade for as a maximum height of a cupola.
Currently, the maximum building height is 35, so under that, someone could go 45 feet higher?
Yeah, for a cupola.
On residential construction, or they just said 75, period?
Well, due to, because we do a mean roof height, an average roof height, and so then if someone wants, a 20-foot cupola, we didn't want to put that restrictions on them.
So it seems to me
Doesn't
that
that seem really high?
Yes,
Am
it
I
should
missing
be.
that?
It seems to me it should be a certain standard above wherever the mean 35 foot is, or the roof line of the house. It can't exceed 10 feet higher than the existing roof line. Average mean, right, mean. And I have to say,
Yeah. So,
appurtenance is one time just because it's in there.
Cool word.
Yeah, it is. You have to use it at least once.
Well, I was not at the planning board, but I'll bring your attention. The definition of language extends beyond just cupolas.
Mm-hmm.
It talks about church spires and other items, and so perhaps the 75-foot was more in reference to one of those items than a cupola. But we've used the word cupola, but there's other things that can be put on a roof that this language will cover.
Would it allow
As
someone
things-
to build a 75-foot cupola?
If you add the
200
language
feet,
as
200 square
represented without
feet.
restricting it, yes.
I think this needs a little more
Along with that.
work.
Also, the fact, looking at your pictures, I'm looking, and it may not add one way, but I think it would add living space, because I can now make a nice cathedral ceiling in my top floor, or as I see 3 stories, which is the standard 35 feet, I've almost got a 4th story. That's
basically
living
what's happening.
space. It may only be roof line or above my standard, 6-foot or 8-foot height, but that's giving living space, and that's kind of tearing down our 35-foot reason.
We're saying 10% of the roof line is,
10%
but on
10% of
a
the footprint.
15,000 square foot house, that's a big.
Well,
cupola.
it's maximum of 200 square feet.
No, maximum 200, okay.
But,
Oh, there it is. I got
but
it right.
going back to, it applies to church spires, et cetera, et cetera. Is a cupola broken out separately? It's not. It's just listed as one of the constraints.
Correct.
But I would suggest to you a 75-foot above mean grade, 200 square foot cupola. That almost needs to be broken out separately. A church spire, for example, is not intended, purposed, whatever, to be living space. And I would suggest that needs to be almost delineated from. Most cupolas are livable, right? that they are. I don't have one.
Didn't we already change this a little bit in order to add the the climbing area over in Corolla and including the top of the lighthouse? Didn't we already allow certain things to be added?
Well, Yeah, but that was the commercial
That's-
construction to allow for
Commercial.
the, yeah,
Right.
right, for a residential cupola.
No, the reason we have this is that we do have exceptions for our height limitation. And in those exceptions are church spires, belfries, cupolas, and domes. And that's why it got kind of exaggerated to the point that it did. So, you can't make a change to.
Everybody's going to push as hard at the limits as they possibly can. We've certainly learned that lesson by now. So
They're going to get a fourth story out of it.
Right.
I think anything that is quote unquote livable space needs to be fall under a different constraint.
So we can take the cupola right out of that verbiage, or no?
Well, cupola is part because it's not the whole roof line, right? It is a artistic and an architectural feature. But again, a 75 foot above mean grade, 200 square foot cupola could fit a lot of people.
Chairs, yeah.
So I like the 10 feet above. The language is going to have to get tweaked to reflect that. I don't think we're going to be able to put it together here right now, but I'm not sure
Yeah.
this one's ready for us.
Yeah, and you got the belfries, domes. Can you put a dome on a house?
Yeah.
So it's just needs a little work.
In that case, I want a helicopter landing pad.
Right.
You can do that. Just not on top of the roof.
Okay, any further questions for Ms. LaCicero? At this point, I would open a public hearing for Currituck County text amendment. No one is currently signed up. I will now close the public hearing, and I will open the floor for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we table this issue
And I'll second
until
that.
I agree.
staff can get back to us with more definitive language for specifically cupolas and/or other features that would provide living space.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Moving on to new business, consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, make a motion for approval.
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Moving on to Commissioner's report. Commissioner Hall?
The holidays have come and gone, and I'll tell you folks, I think it was a success when I hear the retail people, when I hear the family folks. But during the season, some of our loved ones here in Currituck County have passed away. I was fortunate to know some of them, Judy Penny, Bob Kohler. Those folks made a difference in my life and a lot of folks here in Currituck County. For those that I don't mention their names, they meant just as much to me as anybody else. I just happen to know these two folks, and they did a lot for us. When you go home tonight, say a prayer for your family and those that have passed away and aren't going to be in 2018 with us. Thank you.
Commissioner White?
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Commissioner Beaumont?
Nothing this evening.
Commissioner Etheridge? Commissioner Gilbert?
I was just going to concur with Commissioner Hall. We've had quite a few losses, and Bob Kohler and Judith Penny, and also Mike Kraft, who just recently passed away. So I just offer my thoughts and prayers to the families, and each one of those persons are surely going to be missed because they certainly added a lot to our community. And with that being said, over the holidays, I had the opportunity to go out with the Modoc Fire Department and visit the neighborhoods right before the holiday, escorting the jolly old St. Nick. And that's a program that the fire departments do that they don't have to do. And I just want to reach out for the beginning of the year and just thank all of our law enforcement and our fire and EMS because they really step up to the plate. And again, attending some of the meetings over at Knott's Island, the volunteers that are being generated, I just can't thank each and every one of you out there serving us. Just thank you for what you do.
Commissioner Payment?
Nothing at this time.
I have nothing at this time. County Manager's report?
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Thank you, sir. With that, I'll call for a motion to adjourn the regular meeting.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. I will now open a special meeting of the Ocean Sands Water and Sewer District Board and hand it over to Mr. Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You are now sitting as the Ocean Sands Water and Sewer District Board. In that capacity, we're asking your approval for a budget amendment for the Ocean Sands Water and Sewer District. That budget amendment is being driven, as we know, for several years now. The district has been in prolonged and protracted litigation with the Coastland Development Company, and we are making a budget amendment to support the legal defense of that litigation. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Scanlon? Open the floor for a motion.
Mr. Approved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. We'll now call for a motion to adjourn a special meeting of the Ocean Sands Water and Sewer District Board. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.